Okay, I've provided this short video to describe the contents of the zip file that I provided a link to. So what we've learned from past experience is that providing only the final output data by itself is inadequate because this does not provide the necessary information for an end user to truly analyze and interrogate the output data. Because, in order to properly interrogate the output data, the end user must have access to the input data, the parameters used in the model, and an accuracy assessment of the outputs. There could be other data that could be useful as well. But with that in mind, that's why I created this zip file. And so just to reiterate, so you have the KMZ file that I provided, which is just the output data. The zip file contains MXD documents, so ArcGIS map documents that allow you to interrogate the data. Let me interject at this point that in the future, to help with the fact that many of us are not GIS experts, that we want to create a viewer that this data would just be available to anybody to interrogate. But we're not at that point yet. Within our lab on other projects, we are building that viewer, and so it will be available in the coming months. And so in lieu of that, I've created this MXD file that is here on the screen that is an approximation of what the viewer will be like, but the viewer will be much easier to use. So if we look in the analysis folder here in the table of contents, we have the first input, the first run output was run just by landfire data. The second output was the TU data, the Trout Unlimited data. And then because of the fact that the Trout Unlimited data really didn't do a classification of conifer species, that this hybrid that was split at the forest boundary was a third run of the data. And this is what the KMZ that was provided is based on. So this output 3 is what you should look at if you want to compare that run. And then so some of the inputs, so we have our drainage network, we have the valley bottom, which we won't look at right now, and then we have the historic and the existing vegetation. So once again, this is how the hybrid was built, these two data sets, and then this is the historic, the BPS layer, biophysical setting, that estimation of what was on the landscape prior to settlement. And so this is maybe an important data set that we could query, we could question in this landscape, as we've learned from Mike Scott's work that potentially these areas had less woody riparian species in the past than they currently do. But really, if you look at the landfire data, that would suggest that the corridor was actually dominated by let me pull this over here, black willow and narrowleaf willow. So that's what this classification is based on. So once again, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, and so this is a way you can interrogate why the outputs are the way they are. In the future, if we were unsatisfied with our historic vegetation layer, that's something that we can invest time and money in refining. But I just thought I would just step through an example of how you can kind of interrogate the data, find out the reasons behind what the data outputs are. So you'll notice we have one for the RCA model, the riparian recovery potential model, the riparian vegetation conversion type model, and then the riparian vegetation departure from historic. So we have the four models as different MXDs. And so I guess if you're not a GIS whiz, this might be hard to access, but I thought I'd at least provide it to you because I think it's useful, and I think as a recommendation for making this data more usable, this is exactly one of those things we need to provide, is more transparency in the how the output data was derived, and allowing the end user to interrogate the data better.